The rain had stopped by evening. By then, Daniel was home, moving through the kitchen like nothing had changed. He kissed my cheek, set his briefcase down, and asked about dinner. I answered automatically, but my thoughts weren't there. They were still tangled in the charged silence Mike had left behind. That touch, those words. The way the world had seemed to tilt for just a moment. As if the floor beneath me had shifted. The day after I told myself it would fade. That whatever had happened, or almost happened, was a one-time thing. But the next morning, I found myself lingering in the kitchen. Looking at the spot where he'd stood, my mind kept replaying it, frame by frame. The way his hand had brushed mine when he took the towel. The almost kiss that wasn't, the subtle way he'd said, "I notice." I didn't want to admit it, but part of me wanted him to come back. And then, 2 days later, he did. The unexpected return. It was late afternoon when I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. But when I opened it, there he was, standing in that same gray t-shirt, his hair wind-tousled, a faint smudge of grease on his forearm. "Hey," he said, almost casual. "Just wanted to make sure the leak stayed fixed. Sometimes those seals loosen again." I could have told him everything was fine. I could have said thanks and closed the door, but instead, I stepped aside and let him in. The second shift, he crouched under the sink again, checking the pipes. I leaned against the counter, my heart beating a little too fast. "It's holding up," he said after a moment. "But," I tilted my head. "But what?" He sat back on his heels, looking at me in a way that made my stomach tighten. "You seem distracted." The words caught me off guard. "I'm fine. Are you?" I wanted to look away, but his gaze was steady, as if he could see right through the thin layers I was trying to hide behind. The words, "I wasn't ready for you. Keep doing it," he said softly. "Doing what?" "Pretending you don't feel anything." My breath caught. "Mike." He stood then, closing the space between us with slow, deliberate steps. "You can tell yourself it's nothing, that you're just being polite. But I saw the way you looked at me the other day, and you know what?" "What?" My voice was barely more than a whisper. "I look at you the same way." The moment he was close now, close enough that I could feel the faint heat radiating off his skin. There was a pause, just long enough for me to stop him if I wanted to. I didn't when his hand came up to rest against my cheek. My heart skipped, not just a beat, but a full, weightless moment where it felt like time had stopped. It was gentle at first, his thumb brushing along my skin as if he were memorizing. Then his other hand slid to the small of my back, pulling me closer. The kiss that wasn't just a kiss when his lips touched mine. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was slow, almost hesitant, as if he knew this was a line we couldn't uncross. And yet, we crossed it anyway. The sound of my heartbeat was so loud in my ears I almost didn't hear the faint creak of the floorboards down the hall. The shock hello. The voice was Daniel's. I pulled back instantly, my hand flying to my lips. Mike stepped away, his expression shifting from something deep and unguarded to guarded and unreadable in an instant. Daniel walked into the kitchen, glancing between us. "Mike, didn't know you were here. Just checking the leak," Mike said, his tone smooth. "All good now." Coma nodded, oblivious, and started talking about dinner plans. I stood there, still trying to slow my racing heart. The realization when Mike left a few minutes later. He didn't say anything more to me. Just a brief glance, one that carried everything we couldn't say in front of Daniel. And that was when realized why my heart had truly stopped in that moment. It wasn't just the kiss, wasn't just being caught on the edge of something. Dangerous it was knowing, deep down, that I wanted it to happen again. The aftermath that night, lying beside Daniel, I kept my eyes closed long after he'd fallen asleep. My mind wasn't on the rain, or the leak, or even the kiss itself. It was on the space between what had happened and what could happen next. Because once someone makes your heart stop like that, you never forget. The kitchen was warm from the coffee, but outside, the rain had picked up, drumming harder against the roof. The sound filled the pauses in our conversation, making the air feel heavier. Mike was leaning casually against the counter, his mug cradled in both hands. His eyes weren't fixed on anything in particular, but I could feel them shift to me every now and then. A glance so quick it might have been accidental, but my heart caught each time. I told myself it was just my imagination. He was my husband's friend. He'd come over to fix a leak. That was all, and yet, something about his presence made the room feel smaller. The first shift when he set his mug down. He didn't step away immediately. Instead, he reached out, not toward me, but toward the dish towel draped over my shoulder. "You've got coffee on your sleeve," he said softly. I glanced down, a small splash, barely visible. I would have brushed it off myself, but before I could, he did it for me, his fingers grazing the fabric, his knuckles brushing my arm. It was such a small thing. So small, but the air seemed to thicken around us. "Thanks," I said, my voice lower than I intended. He just gave a short nod. But there was a faint curve to his mouth, as if he'd noticed my tone. A conversation that went somewhere it shouldn't. Mike went back to leaning against the counter, crossing his arms. "You know," he began, "Daniel's lucky." I tilted my head. "Lucky?" "Yeah. To have someone who takes care of things, keeps the place together." He gestured vaguely around the kitchen. "Not just the house, everything. You keep things running." It was meant to be a compliment, I think, but something about the way he said it felt different, personal, almost too personal. "That's just life," I said lightly, trying to wave it off. "Someone has to do it." He gave me a look. "Not everyone does. Some people let things fall apart." For a moment, I wondered if he was talking about more than just houses. The moment he crossed the line, the sound of rain deepened, turning into a steady roar. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. I was about to ask if he needed a towel for his hair before heading out when I heard him say something I wasn't expecting. "You ever feel unseen?" The words caught me completely off guard. "What do you mean?" I asked slowly. "Like you're there, doing everything you're supposed to, but no one really notices. No one really sees you for who you are." I felt my chest tighten. "Sometimes," I admitted, before I could stop myself. His gaze held mine a moment longer than it should have. "I notice." It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but the way he said it, like it was the most natural truth in the world, made my pulse quicken. To close, I busied myself rinsing our mugs in the sink, telling myself that this was just friendly conversation. But then I felt him move behind me. He wasn't touching me. Not yet, but I could sense how close he was. The warmth of his body, the faint scent of rain and soap. "You work hard," he said quietly. "You deserve more than you get." I froze, my hands still under the stream of water. "Mike," he didn't step back. "I'm not saying anything should happen. I'm just telling you what I see." But the way his voice wrapped around, those words told me something very different. The choice to stay, I could have asked him to leave. I could have laughed it off. I could have changed the subject entirely. Instead, I turned off the tap and set the mugs aside. Slowly, I faced him. We were close enough now that I could see the droplets of rain still clinging to his hair. His eyes searched mine, not rushing, not pushing, just waiting. "Mike," I said again, softer this time, and that's when he did it. What he did, he reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. It was such a simple gesture, but it felt deliberate, intimate, in a way that made my breath catch. His fingertips lingered just a moment too, long against my cheek, tracing a path that wasn't necessary. My skin warmed beneath his touch. "You should be seen," he murmured. It was dangerous. The way he said it, like a door had been left slightly ajar. And all I had to do was push it open. For a second, I thought he might lean in. I could almost feel the possibility hanging between us, but instead, he let his hand drop. The aftermath of almost, he stepped back, breaking the moment, but it didn't feel like it was gone. It was still there, in the charged silence. In the way neither of us seemed to know what to do next. "I should get going," he said, his voice a little rougher now. I nodded. But my throat felt too tight for words. He gathered his tools, slipped his boots back on, and stood in the doorway for just a second longer than necessary. Then he was gone. The sound of his truck fading into the rain. The lingering effect, Ty stood there for a long time after he left. My hand unconsciously brushing the place where his fingers had been. Nothing had happened. Not really, but something had changed. And deep down, I knew whatever that was between us, it wasn't over. The rain had been falling all morning, a gentle but steady patter against the kitchen window. Tia. I had always loved rainy days, the way the world seemed quieter, wrapped in a muted gray blanket. But today, the sound was accompanied by something far less poetic, a faint drip-drip from under the sink. It had started 2 nights ago. At first, I thought it was nothing, maybe just the pipes expanding, or a little leftover water trickling down. But by the next morning, there was a small puddle pooling on the tiled floor. I cleaned it up and mentioned it to my husband, Daniel. "Over breakfast, you should call a plumber," I'd suggested, spooning sugar into my coffee. But Daniel had shaken his head. "No need. I'll ask Mike to stop by. He's great with this kind of stuff." Mike, his old college friend. They'd known each other for over a decade, back when they both had messy apartments, ate instant noodles for dinner, and wore shirts they hadn't ironed in weeks. But where Daniel had settled into a corporate routine, Mike had gone a different way. He was the kind of man who could fix a leaky roof, change his own oil, and build a bookshelf from scratch. He worked as a contractor now, moving from job to job, always tanned from the sun. Always with that easy confidence that came from knowing he could handle just about anything with his hands. And now, apparently, he was going to be the one fixing our leak. I didn't think much of it at first. Mike had been over plenty of times. Birthdays, barbecues, the occasional weekend beer with Daniel in the backyard. I knew him in the casual, polite way you know your spouse's friends. Just enough to exchange a joke or two, but never enough to cross into anything personal. Still, there was something about Mike that was hard to ignore. The morning he came, it was still drizzling when I heard the sound of a truck pulling into our driveway. I was barefoot in the kitchen, a dish towel slung over my shoulder, my hair loosely tied back. I peeked through the blinds just in time to see him step out of the driver's seat. He was wearing a plain gray t-shirt, dark jeans, and a tool belt slung low on his hips. His hair was slightly damp from the rain, and he brushed it back with one hand as he glanced toward the house. For a second, I hesitated. I don't know why. Maybe it was the fact that Daniel wasn't home. He'd left early for a meeting, and it would just be me and Mike in the house. Maybe it was the way the rain made the air feel closer, thicker, like the whole world had shrunk to the space between the front door and the kitchen sink. I opened the door before he could knock. "Morning," he said, smiling in that easy way of his. "Daniel told me you've got a leak that needs looking at." "Yeah, under the kitchen sink. It's been dripping for a couple of days now," I replied. Stepping aside to let him in, he kicked off his boots at the door, leaving them on the mat, and followed me into the kitchen. There was a faint scent of rain and sawdust clinging to him. That mix of outdoors and hard work that felt oddly comforting. The routine of a repair. Mike crouched down and opened the cabinet doors under the sink. "Looks like your pipe seals." "Loose," he said, his voice muffled as he leaned inside. "Shouldn't be too hard to fix." I knelt beside him, handing him the flashlight from the counter. My knees brushed the edge of the cabinet, and I could feel the cool air rising from the pipes. Mike's hands moved with practiced ease, unfastening, tightening, adjusting. "You've done this before," I said. "More to fill the silence than anything," he chuckled. "Too many times to count. Leaks are easy. It's the surprises you have to watch out for." I tilted my head. "Surprises? Yeah. You open something up, and you never know what you'll find. Old wiring, rust, damage you didn't expect. Sometimes you fix one thing and end up uncovering a dozen more problems." I wasn't sure if he was talking about plumbing anymore. Small talk that wasn't so small while he worked. We talked. Not about anything important at first, just the weather, his latest project, how Daniel had been doing at work. But then the conversation shifted. "You ever think about leaving this place?" Mike asked suddenly. I blinked. The house. Yeah. Or just doing something different. "Getting away for a while?" I laughed softly. "You sound like you're talking about running away from life." "Maybe I am," he said, with a faint smile, tightening a valve. "You ever want to?" The question lingered in the air, heavier than it should have been. "I think everyone does sometimes," I admitted. The moment I noticed, it wasn't until he reached for a wrench and his arm brushed mine that I realized how close we were. There was nothing overt about it, just the incidental contact of two people working in a tight space. But it sent a little spark up my skin. One I immediately told myself to ignore. He didn't say anything, and neither did I. But there was a subtle shift in the air. The kind you can't quite name but can definitely feel. The leak wasn't the only thing being fixed. 15 minutes later, Mike had the pipe tightened and the drip had stopped. He stood up, stretching, his shirt lifting slightly to reveal the line of his lower back. I turned away quickly, pretending to check. "The sink? All done," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "You should be good now. No more puddles." I thanked him and offered him coffee before he left. He accepted, and we stood at the kitchen counter, steam curling from our mugs. The rain still whispering against the windows. We didn't talk much. Then we didn't need to. The silence was charged, and in that moment I realized that a simple repair visit had shifted something, not in the pipes, but in the space between us.